care to be the spiritual leader of 10,000 goats? I'll help. I'll be minister of the exchequer. If you don't mind, I'll check her myself. I assume we're taping already? Like it matters, right? All right. The news. While the lives of ordinary men seem confusing, complex, and uncertain, the lives of people involved in such as this are comparably simple. They have but one thing to do. They know what it is, and in one sense, they know exactly how to do it. Their only challenge, as curious, if not shameful as it sounds, is in constantly remembering to do it. Since I brought in the word shameful, let's be clear its etymology in the context. A gnat's odds of victory in tug-of-war with 10 billion universes. Is there not something favorable and refreshing to be said for odds so simple to calculate and comprehend? Only the ordinary are concerned about the psychological conditions in which they live. The alert know that the conditions are genetically within them. You are your own environment, and helplessly so, unless you're aware of it. A man more conscious doesn't need a doctor, just more consciousness. Within each person is a disturbing car wreck, which you constantly pass, or which constantly passes you, and there are two ways of dealing with it. One is to look at it, for whatever reasons seem prevailing in your case, and the other is to not look at it, for which, under ordinary circumstances, there are no reasons. Those trying to move faster and go someplace new do not operate under ordinary circumstances. They can't. And that's the name of that driving tip. One man's most recent, though he asked me not to tell you about it, fears regarding this sort of activity is that you spend 50 years thinking that it is super important only to realize it is not. Or something to that effect. Remember, you didn't hear it from me. Common among the ordinary is concern about afterlife payoffs. Less common is active concern over making present life pay off. While sitting and gazing one day, a chap so pondered, why is it easier to make people feel sad than happy? Why is it easier to make men feel guilty rather than proud? Why is it easier to write tragedy than humor? And why are we given to reflect on problems rather than possibilities? Many questions present, one reply a-lurking. As regards thinking about the past, one man has a simple approach. Don't do it. One man offers to share his most recent disturbing self-inquiry. Which is worse, he asked, the initial feeling of being lost, or later finding a compass and then consistently failing to use it? This should probably not be read around those with microwave implants or people given to fits of country and western. As regards the mind's mental visual abilities, if it can hit the nail on the head, it's looking at the wrong nail. If you feel like you don't understand this, wait for your future grandfather to explain it to you as soon as the upcoming comes up. Uh-oh, corollary, though I didn't intend it to be. Corollary beyond my control. Ignorance is always a result of a misplacement in time. If you can hit the nail on the head, you're looking at a useless nail. One guy who's been through every mystical method and discipline known to man remains convinced that there is still one simple trick that life is yet to reveal to him that will bring all of his past efforts together and result finally in that payoff so long sought for. That a guy, you hang in there. You're for sure on track. I can't tell whether there was a touch of any sarcasm in that final remark or not. And I didn't mean that sardonically. One man's mind said, I feel so useless, but considering what I'm constructed of, it's no surprise. And it fell on the poor man to ponder why his mind had thought such a thing, and then left him to deal with it. And now the closing stock prices. One advantage of thinking that life doesn't make sense is that it will protect you from seeing how it does. You realize that's down a quarter from yesterday. And now the absolute final stock market report for the day. One advantage to being dizzy and disoriented is in being dizzy and disoriented, which is unchanged from before. A man opened one eye, looked up at the ceiling and said, wake me when it gets even more confusing. Metaphors exist so that things which can't be pointed to directly can still be pointed toward, which is also to give the reason language itself exists. Without getting into the sticky fact that without speech, there'd be no urges to point at anything to begin with. Psychological health, yet another view. The mind treats symptoms, understanding cures. One man had a thing written down on a slip of paper he carried. It said, if you think too much about how things are going, they'll seem to begin to be going badly. And the final supreme cry of the would-be conscious. Save me from the power of the reasonable, the familiar, the predictable, and habitual. Regardless of how I know it seems, under ordinary conditions, men do not individually think. Life thinks through them, producing the sensation. There is but one disappointment for a mystic, which is the discovery that no one else is as interested in it as he is. As concerns becoming wiser, if you don't know how you got wiser, you didn't get wiser. You just got older. A more conscious investor doesn't count accrued interest as income. Local conditions said to one man, you're never satisfied, are you? And the man replied, you know the answer to that. You know what I'm up to. The reason the few deal only in cash is the inherent danger of credit. Thought one guy, everything I own is in hock. Thought he further, thank God I don't own anything. In the broader sense, we're all totally helpless. But at a more personal level, you're only helpless as long as you do not realize your condition. And still another man finally got life on the phone and said, if I may be so bold as to make a suggestion and life interrupted, inasmuch as you're still breathing, don't ever say again that I have no sense of humor. Meanwhile, somewhere, far, far away in your far distant future stands a man saying, do you not find the very fact of being alive itself funny? Whenever he would hear the accusation that someone was too smart for their own good, one man would think, I know what they mean, but I also realize that they don't. A man with regrets is a man with a rash disguised as memory. Yet another way of looking at it is that you can either try to seize control or try to give up trying to seize control. When one man heard there was a book of humor entitled How to Torture Your Mind, he thought, since when is redundancy funny? There is one thing at which the more you directly point, the harder it is to see. Minds being different makes them seem individual. An illusion, my friends, an illusion. If you would consider the ad hoc description that I mentioned of men living two simultaneous parallel lives, the essential physical one and the derivative mental one. Physical one being the one he lives, the one that no one takes into specific account, the one in which the mind cannot take into specific account. Because no matter what it thinks about it, it is derivative. It is a second order. It is at least once removed. It is no longer any valid representation of life. It is not genuine. And I don't mean as opposed to some genuine description. There is no genuine description. So get over it. If you can and want to. But if you see an ordinary, sane, civilized man living two instant lives, it's not theoretical. You're living it right now. An essential, nonverbal life of the body, and then a derivative one of the mind. If you can use that as a kind of temporary viewfinder, or binoculars, or trinoculars, according to what sort of exposure you've had to radioactivity. If you can use it temporarily as a way in which to consider it, then I was going to try and present a bit more. Everything that is available to the mind, which is to read everything that is available that life makes available to the mind, is for the purpose of making it easier for you to fit into life. It's to make life easier for you. Whereas this sort of activity, again I can point out, is absolutely, is there possible that you can engage in even more overblown hyperbole? I don't know how. What is better and worse than absolute singularity? A singularity, another singularity in a view of this kind of activity is that it is not for the purpose of making it easier for you to live. It has always been for the purpose to explain life. Every other aspect of man's mental existence, civilized existence, all the way from education to religion, politics, but as always, religion offers the most expansive, publicly available example. And you could include philosophy for those of you with a certain intellectual bent. They're for the purpose of making it easier for you to fit into life. And if they were presented with such a comment as I have just prefaced all of this with, I am sure that they would be very inclined to disagree and say, no, it is not simply to make it easier for you to fit into life. Indeed, philosophy would swear that their intention is to help explain life, and it is not. It is impossible. There is no information that is available to man's mind that will explain life. That is not even the attempt. The only reason I was going to flog on this for a bit is because the mind itself, you'll notice, is unstoppably attracted, and it just immediately feels that there are certain explanations that offer more promise than others. And that is one of the grand illusions is one of the grand wastes of time for somebody interested in this, because you end up, as always, you think you've changed the level of the game, but you haven't. You end up, as always, except you think you're becoming more particular as to what you think about. But it's life knocking. It's the information knocking. It is the regular traffic running through the mind, and people who become involved with this. And God forbid that they be involved with it for several decades, because then you cannot look upon the possibility that you have wasted several decades of energy along a certain line, which I'm not saying you have, but that you have expended energy along a certain line, such as I am becoming more and more mentally insightful. I'm beginning to understand life intellectually. I'm beginning to understand it in an increasingly precise manner. And so you may feel as though that you are not wasting your neural energy on the same knickknacks, run-of-the-mill notions, fears that you did in the past. No, you're now on some other level. But it is an easily observable fact for those wired up and born to be interested in this sort of thing. All you have to do is look. The information, I don't care what it is, the information that is readily available, and I can be more specific. The information that is available outside of you, with very few exceptions. And then the exceptions are only exceptions by attempt, not through success. But anything outside of you is for the purpose. All information, all ideas, I don't care of what apparent, metaphysical, extraordinary realm they appear to exist on, at which level they seem to exist. It does not matter if it is external to you, its purpose, its only purpose. It cannot be stretched, it cannot be augmented, it cannot be translated to make it otherwise. All of it is for the purpose of making it easier for humans to live life. It is not to explain life. Once you get any glimpse of that, once you get a sufficient glimpse of it, it cuts down, it makes it more efficient. You can spend your entertainment dollar more efficiently. And as always, I can beat that. Seen in a sufficient gulp, you have almost nowhere to spend your entertainment dollar. And I assume everyone remembers, when I say entertainment, I include all information, all incoming intellectual input. There is nowhere to spend one's money. It seems so otherwise to the mind. In fact, the mind cannot even see this directly, but it seems absolutely so otherwise, because there's information just easily available. You might look at any apparent codified philosophy. Or again, it's always easier to use religion, though some of you understand that I include psychology and philosophy. The Christian church. The Christian church would say the idea, the purpose of Christianity, the purpose of the church, if they were responding to what I was saying verbally, if someone, a spokesman, they would say, well, you're wrong because amongst other things, good deeds, charitable works, and etc., whatever else they want to point out, but they would say, amongst other things, the purpose of the church is to explain life, contrary to what you just said, that the purpose of the church is to explain life. It is to explain the church's view of life. The mind never sees that. It's right there in front of you. Why are there various religions? Why are there schools of psychology? Why are there schools of philosophy? There is no information that life makes available outside of oneself that is in the least to explain life. And when they say that the purpose is, contrary to what I just noted, when they say that the purpose is to help explain life, which philosophy would certainly take absolute exception to what I'm saying. They would say, well, that's our whole purpose. That is the whole purpose, or even psychology would, with a slightly different twist to it. They would say that is our entire raison d'etre, that we are here to explain life, and they're not. They're not trying to mislead anybody. They don't understand it. But they are not there to explain life. They are there to explain whatever the map is. That there is no such thing as an explanation outside of you. Any explanation given is the explanation of someone else's explanation. It only seems to humans, as it's supposed to individuals with an ordinary mind, it seems to have a greater weight when it is institutionalized. There seems to be, without any doubt, no one analyzes this, but it is a fact, observably, experientially, that there is a difference between a man on a street corner waving a Bible or a Koran or whatever and mouthing off some, let's say it's not some apparently deranged interpretation of something, but a man just reading from the scriptures and talking about God wants you to do this and etc. Standing on a street corner. You do not even have to be religious to sense, without any doubt, a difference between that and a statement made by a representative of a whole religion, such as the Pope. That there is a difference when an organization seems to be, when an idea seems to have an institutional source or backing. And not just religion, there'd be a difference of guys standing on the street corner hollering some political idea. That may not be all that extreme, but just something about we should change our view of taxation, let's say. But it's just one guy out there, and there he stands, seems reasonable enough. And if you had any interest in it or paid any attention, there seems to be, without any doubt, forget whether for good or ill or whether you agree with it, beyond any ordinary attempted analyzation, there appears to be, without any doubt, a difference somewhere. It's just accepted as a difference between that one guy standing on the street corner making some comment to passersby about how we should change the tax code, the way in which we collect taxes here. Between that and if you had the head of some large political party or the president, the prime minister of some country to make a statement representing the government or representing his party, there is a difference, the effect it has. Again, don't consider whether it's right or wrong, but you surely can sense what I'm saying. And right there, if we went no further, an ordinary man would realize that my mind has been, in a sense, playing tricks on me lo these many years. Because there is no more objective significance to the one guy on the street corner speaking for God or speaking for an attempted or proposed change in the way in which our government is run. There is no difference in the objective validity of it, in the usefulness of it, between that and the proclamations of the head of a several million people denomination or the head of an entire government. And yet the mind, an ordinary mind, would still not be satisfied with that statement. And let's even assume, not to prove I'm right, but let's assume that an ordinary mind was sitting here listening to that, and they sense what I'm saying, and they still don't believe it, or they still can't accept it. And if I could read minds and say, well, I can see that you heard that, but you can't accept it. And the person will go, no, I can't. And I go, well, why? You know the rest of it, don't you? They can't explain why, but they're convinced that can't be true. That's not right. That alone should give somebody, if they ever stumbled on it themselves, some suspicion that their mind is not perhaps their best friend. Individually. It's not your worst enemy, but to consider that my mind is the entree to higher levels of understanding and insight. You got all the makings of an alcoholic, you're just saving, or a drug addict, you're just saving the money, the expense of the addiction. The literal expense. You might find that if you look at it in a certain way, you might find a certain thing of interest as I try to narrow down this unwieldy, extremely greasy, attempted area of explanation. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you the point I'm about to get at. As if you fall into the latter category when I said that all the information external to a person is for the sake of making them fit into life better, whereas a very, 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 very few number of people are ever wired up to look for information, to insist on it, to explain what life is, not make life easier to be led, but to explain it. And to explain it, you eventually would fall in, you would stumble upon, realize yourself, whether you were put into words, that you have to turn your attention absolutely on yourself. You have to focus your mental attention, you have to focus your own consciousness on you, nowhere else. And this has nothing to do with selfishness or egoism, because if anything, it'd make it easier. At any rate, that's not the problem. It doesn't mean to turn all your attention on you, because you can't turn, I said mental attention now. That has nothing to do with turning your back on your family or relinquishing your responsibilities that you have to other people, and etc. It's got nothing to do with that. We're talking about an internal, non-physical matter. And I was going to say what I started to use as a preface was not as any sort of proof, but to wrangle in again certain of the considered historical events. Consider all the way from all the stories that might seem related to activities like this, such as from Zoroaster to Buddha, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, this time in a certain way. That by all the reports, we just take the myths, and I could bring in the other myths. How about Odin? I forgot Odin. We never give him credit. Of course, many people those particular stories, those stories give people the chills. Some people. At any rate, all there within that and many other stories, many. But at any rate, those well-known ones, if you look at it again for me to twist them around to my devious purposes, is all these men went through a period of apparently trying to swallow, trying to absorb all of the information of their day. Of course, of a particular kind, they were interested in what appeared to be some internal matters, something having to do with what used to be called the spiritual life, the internal conscious life of the person. And you start off in the only way possible. When you find yourself itching in this particular way, you know it's not physical and it's internal. And so they turn their attention out, the same as everyone who gets involved with this, all of you did, that you turned out. I mean, it's not a matter of making a mistake. There's nowhere else the mind has to turn when it starts out. Well, most people, even when it ends out. But when it starts out, you look externally, you begin to question parents, other people, you begin to question books, and etc. But you can take their stories, if you'll notice, the point I was going to get to is, in all those stories, they spent some number of years apparently trying to track down all the teachings, all the information. They tried to absorb, they tried to consume all of the external information and reach the point that that wasn't it. And then you have stories all the way from the retiring off in a wilderness from a mountaintop by themselves to Buddha deciding, well, screw all this, that's enough. I'm going to go and sit under this tree and not move until I either die or figure out what this is about. Muhammad got the same story going off in the cave. You got the same thing with Moses wandering up on mountaintops, and Zoroaster had his own version. The point is, it is though, if you take it as being a metaphor in this particular way, that they looked externally, because again, I repeat, to start off with, it's not a flaw, it's not a misstep you make. You can't start any other way. And so, such as the Buddha story, apparently became an expert, followed every teaching, every mystical weird person, every guru. He became an expert in everything, at least enough that he understood that he wringed each thing out of every piece of what appeared to be useful nourishment, and it was no nourishment at all. And so they all end up doing one thing represented by physical myths, such as the retirement off by themselves, which that's all the mind can make of such stories. But what they did was, I suggest to you, so what I'm telling you now, is you eventually realize that you have got to focus all of your attention on you. There is nowhere else. You cannot focus consciousness. There is nothing to study. And you cannot tell yourself that. No one can tell you that to start with, because that alone tells you nothing. If someone had told you that when you started, that, by the way, you're wasting your time talking to anybody about this or reading about it, and let's say that you met somebody that was so impressive, was so charismatic, so full of alpha male testosterone and magical powers that you thought, wow, I'm glad I met you, and saved all that time. You mean I could have studied for 40 or 50 years and accomplished nothing? They go, yeah. And you think, wow, God, I'm glad I met you. You know, you want to kiss his paw, you know, thank you, thank you. Now what? Of course, there's always these stories absolutely break down. It couldn't happen, because if the guy actually knew what he's talking about, he wouldn't have ever done that to you. But to go ahead in my story, I assume you got it, that if somebody knew something and for some reason fell into a lapse enough to do what I just did, to tell you, you're wasting your time, son, and he convinced you, you were just struck with the validity, and you went, well, now what? He'd suddenly realize, uh-oh. Because there's no now what. In other words, he can't say, well, now that we cleared that up, and I'm going to tell you what it is you're looking for and save you 40 years. There's no such thing. So everyone goes through it. And what I was saying that the stories represent, that are certainly never noticed by the ordinary mind, is not simply a reclusing physically of oneself. It is not a cutting off of external stimuli, which is what the monastic life over a longer period obviously represents and can be used as an attempt to set up conditions more conducive to the eventual focusing on oneself, eventual discovery of the secret, if you will. If you will, what? Don't start that. All right, if you won't. Well, that's better. That's much better. It's good to have an aggressive crowd. As long as I'm not in Los Angeles and they walk in the door and say, oh, do you believe in God? You guys missed that one. At least I knew I wasn't in Portland or even New York. I forgot to tell you about that. Well, it was really enjoyable because the man obviously had no interest either way. But it was like he was just driven to come in, and he walked in after I'd already been talking, just sat down, just immediately. As soon as he sat down, he just hollered out, "Do you believe in God?" Maybe some sort of substitute like "on Wisconsin" or. The mind makes of the stories, what I was going to say, that it's not even important, or it's not necessary, the actual performance or the participation in a monastic life of cutting off all external influence. That is one way to go about it. It's not that it cannot be used, but if you understand another way, that these individuals, man, I'm suggesting eventually you'll see it yourself, it's not just a matter of cutting out the external stimuli, that is, I'll no longer listen to the world, the mean old, evil, dumb, stupid world. It's that you realize there's no selectivity necessary. And you don't have to withdraw. All you got to do is realize that it's just noise, that it's all irrelevant to what you're after, that it's all of equal validity. Then the necessity, although it can be used for an additional reason, but then there is no longer the necessity to be concerned over preferential decisions as to what information is useful, what might be harmful. It's all a waste of time. It's on the same level. There is no information outside of you. There are no maps outside of you. There is no information outside of you that is what you're looking for. And the stories I am suggesting, all such myths, is a final, eventual focusing on oneself, and it turns into fairly innocuous, again it can be used, but fairly indirect physical activities. This focusing, it turns into such things as actual attempts at meditation, just being another form of the monastic life. that they're attempting is always, it always comes to this if a person stumbles across anything useful, if they stumble across anything close to this, is that they finally understand that internally to them, there is some great promise there. There is something that stirs them. There is something that has caught their attention individually to such a degree that it has taken up a sizable amount of their time and energy in life of trying to find out what it is in them that keeps itching, that has a hunger that cannot be satisfied. The focus will eventually fall directly on oneself. And after that time, you then understand all the proclaimed prohibitions, or what should be prohibitions, against negativity, against criticism, and ultimately of selectivity in the intellectual world. Remember, we're talking strictly about the intellectual world, the derivative world of man, not the physical world. If there then is, it happens simultaneously over some period of time, doesn't have to be instantaneous, but there is a simultaneous realization that outside of me, and at that time you still don't have any particular overblown impression of yourself, to say the least. It doesn't mean that you have suddenly discovered the cosmic treasure trove of all supernatural information. It is just a gradual simultaneous realization that there is nothing external to me. I mean, being this extremely sharp sort all of us are who've become involved with this. It just seems to sort of finally sneak up on you in some strange way, being as double insightful. The IQs that I'm sure you all have, that you realize, I've given this thing now, and then fill in blank whatever spoke with you, 40, 50, 60 years. And I'll be damned if I do not have what I think now is a fairly reasonable basis for suspending some of my previous faith in this mechanism, which is a more polite way of saying you begin to realize that everything that you have ever thought is meaningless to this. Not partially meaningless, not some of it was more meaningful and meaningless than the others. It was all meaningless. It's like finally wiping a rash off of you once and for all. And again, I repeat, it is not, when I say it's simultaneous with something else, I don't mean the instant realization of what it is you're looking for, or the realization, let us say, of the secret, if you won't. I thought you said if you will. It's hell having to play both parts when there are three parts involved. But at the same time, as I was going to say, the simultaneous event, I'll finally get around to saying both of them, you swear, watch me. At the same time that you realize, again gradually, but you just begin to realize that with no complaint, there's no comment necessary after that, you simply realize that outside of my head, and as of yet you're still not sure what's there, but outside of my head, I know everything in everyone else's head. I know that everything that passes on this planet and has passed, because it's still out there, that everything that humans have ever said and thus thought, all of it is at the same level compared to what I'm after. And it's all meaningless, absolutely meaningless. It has not helped one bit. And that's what I started off, just making the dogmatic survey for you, that is the nature of it. Outside of oneself, there is no information in life to explain life. There is not, and everyone's mind, every sane person's mind on this planet, if they heard such a statement, would, as they should, discount that. And if I insisted for some reason, they would just mark me down as crazy, or it must be some joke. Because that cannot be. The evidence, the proof to the contrary is everywhere about us, all technology, if nothing else. You just point at it, to electricity, whatever, anything that has made life easier on this planet for man. And it's all an output. It's all a result of his derivative life, his mental life. It's not his physical life. His physical life has not invented any of this. His mind has. And so an ordinary mind has the immediate and supportable. There's no way to prove the contrary to the mind. That if I said the mind has done nothing, that everything that a person has thought, as I was putting, of course, in our context, that there's been nothing that you thought that meant anything. And an ordinary mind, if they heard that, would go, just point at electricity, the TV camera now, our clothes, and say, you're crazy. And they're right. That is about that can't be true, that is just absolutely insane. Here's the proof. But now back to what I opened up pointing out to you, that ordinary people, all information is not for the purpose of explaining life, it is to make it easier for them to live life. That is what the mind's about, and that is what all information is about. That's ordinarily available outside of you. It is only a few people who want life explained. And that's notwithstanding the numbers of people that if asked, say, yes, I want life explained. Damn right I do. Almost all sane people, I guess, if asked, would say certainly. They'd fear not to say it because of fear that they would look less than sane and sophisticated. Would you like to know what life's about? Well, certainly. Certainly. But no one, you're either wired up that it's an irresistible urge or you're not. And no matter what you say, but now everyone must know that. So the rest of the information is for the sake of making it easier for you, speaking of you generically, for you to live life. It is not to explain life. The day comes, I'm suggesting, that you realize this on your own. You don't have to certainly see it in the way in which I'm describing it or see it through those words, but you do realize that out there, as wonderful as electricity is, and I know how much some of you personally enjoy electricity, so I am certainly not here to badmouth electricity. Or in the case of some of you, battery-operated energy, which I don't see a need to go into. But it's as though, as I was describing it, you begin to realize, and it finally reaches a point of no backing up, that there's simply, with no comment, no criticism, no animosity, no rancor, you simply understand that everything out there, information, remember we're not speaking physically, but everything of the derivative, the mental life of man, everything outside of you is of the same quality. It is for, even if you never came up with your own description, I'm saying it's for the purpose to make life easier for you to live it. But you simply understand that there is no information. It was more fun, perhaps, reading the works of the ideas of someone in the past who was involved in such as this, and indeed was more enjoyable, and at the time you thought more informative than it was to read a romance novel or read a comic book. I understand that. There's no denying that. But you finally understand that there has been no genetic change in me. There has been no change in my consciousness from reading whoever your past hero was. Let's assume everybody had some mystical hero, the writings or something that you thought, this is it, I understand. That this is it, if I'd met him, he could have told me the answer. He wrote my thoughts. But the day comes, that doesn't mean that you feel any worse about him or that you think any less of him, as if it matters. But none of us want to imagine that we're going to break a dead person's heart. But the day comes that you realize it has done nothing. Where do you have left to look? No one plans this, but I'm telling you, you finally come off your 40 days out in the wilderness. You finally come off the mountain. You finally have your appointed time sitting under the Bodhi tree. And it is all you realize then, I have looked all my life in the wrong place. Again, it could not be helped. It was not some mistake you made. But it happens at the same time that you understand outside of my skin, the information out there is useless to me. And if I push it a bit further, what I've been describing, it's not just useless to you, all of it. See, while everyone else was using the information, which you did in part, that you were using the information out in life to make it easier for you to live. Not just to be sane, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to make use of electricity to make life easier so that you don't have to physically exert as much effort. So you have been participating in the same way of the information that is out there that makes it easier for you to live life, but then you realize that in your own way, it doesn't have to be my words, but you do understand that, yes, that served one purpose. But throughout it all, I thought intermixed in there, or that I would recognize the difference, that I understood the difference between a textbook on physics that explained electricity, that I, for years, understood the difference between that and the writings of Buddha, or the reflections of some past, someone involved with a kind of conscious struggle such as this, that you say, well, there was a difference in it. I recognize the difference. I know you recognize the difference. But the day comes that you understand that there was no difference. That the latter did not explain life to you any more than a textbook on physics did. It seemed to at the time. But are you more conscious? No. Do you understand life any better? No, but I had more fun thinking about it. I know. I know. But then you, again, I'm just suggesting in broad terms, that you, somewhere along there, will begin to strongly suspect what I've been pointing out directly, verbally, that there is no explaining life. Even though I said that apparently is the kind of information that people wired up and born to pursue this, that is what they're after, but there is no explanation. And certainly no one can tell you that. Certainly the mind can't tell you that, because the mind cannot even comprehend that. And so there you are someday off in this never science fiction land that I'm describing. And it's all, I'm going to have to do gestures now, because when you get into extremely complicated, scientifically technical areas, sometimes one must use meaningful hand gestures. So there you are in this area that's kind of like, yeah. People have received a form of the Nobel Prize for less than that, but it's not up to one to nominate oneself, so we'll just see what happens. There you are in this area, and you realize, let me be a little better with words. Let me keep saying you sort of realize, and etc. I don't know that a day comes that you could absolutely realize it this specifically, which is one of the reasons that I talk about such as this, is I go ahead and do it. But it will happen, you know when I say I suggest, I'm saying if you pursue this long enough and you were born in the right house and the cards are not stacked against you and all that bullshit, the day comes and you'll begin to have this realization. You'll begin to find that if you look back over your shoulder, that you have lost all interest, not in any order. You know when you're getting good is when the explanations, the caveats, and the footnotes. You got one line of text, and you've got 400 pages of footnotes. In fact, it's not one line of text, is it? It's the first clause in a sentence. And then it's 450 pages of footnotes, and you hope somewhere in the back of the book they pick up and finish the sentence. Well, we're out of time. Rather than be a realization, I can explain a little bit better, because this is the way it will seem to you. And many of you have already had your own experiences in different areas, the same thing. It's not something you suddenly realize, oh my God, I wasted my time studying so-and-so. That's not the way it works. It's more like one day you see a book on something you've been studying. I'm just making up an example. And perhaps you pick it up and think, well, maybe I'll buy that book. And you pick it up and you realize, I wouldn't buy that book if it cost a penny. I probably wouldn't take it if it was giving it away. But also you realize, wait a minute, the day was not that long ago that I would have gone without food to buy a book such as this. That was on my list years ago, that it had to be one of the books that had parts of the secret. And you suddenly realize, at the least, your immediate realization is, my tastes sure have changed.
Yeah.
As I put in a news item tonight, and I've done several times, on the matter regarding becoming wiser, that said if you don't know how you got wiser, you didn't get wiser, you got older. Now, I've been through that many times. So a person can lose interest in all sorts of things, but let's assume that your interest in such as this has not been slated, that it is no less. We'll just assume that you're as interested now as you were 20 years ago, but here it is, you suddenly are just wandering through a bookstore or just somewhere, and you see a book and glance down, and maybe just walk off. You didn't even look at it, but you realize what the title was, and it strikes you. It's already happened. It was a gradual process, but you realize that some time ago, that would have been a showstopper for you. You would have stopped. You would have damn near swooned. You would have considered that one of the most. You would have grabbed that book. You would have taken the rest of the day off. You wouldn't have gone back to work. You would have gone home to read it. I understand. And suddenly you realize you didn't pick it up. That is the gradual process. Like I said, it's not just an instant realization that somebody goes, well, my God, everything that people say is a bunch of horse shit. It's not that. It's just you gradually lose interest. And I was hesitating. That's where I started the 450-page footnote. It's not you lose interest in some way that's detrimental to you. Don't mean you get the blues that you're getting old, because that's what normally passes for wisdom. That's like ordinary people saying that it's surprising how much wiser they are and tolerant of other people's behavior, and they're 70 years old, and to them behavior is getting up and going to the bathroom and laying back down. The thing, it is the hormonal wearing down, and it's surprising how tolerant you can be. Or if a man asks that, yes, used to I had strong moral convictions, sexual convictions. I used to look at people younger than me or different sexual habits, and I'd think, shame on them. But it's surprising. Here I am now. I'm wise. I have a beard, and I'm sitting on the front porch with a cane, and people defer to me if they notice me at all. But people will say that they are wiser, and the proof is, well, nowadays I can hear, and sex is a great one because we're down to the essential life of man, and about which the derivative side of man always has strong feelings one way or the other. But you know where I'm going with this, surely. But a man can believe, not just say, but you can see it in their little faces. They think, well, I'm so much wiser because I can remember when I used to have fits about abortion or homosexuality or just sex outside of marriage. And I see these young kids walk here past the old folks' home, and I see them with their hands in each other's pants. And I think, out on the street, and I think, years ago when I was younger, I was a minister, as a matter of fact, you might say. That would have just set me on fire. And now I look at it, and I don't know. It's the wisdom. It's having lived a full life. I can look upon that and realize, it's different strokes. No, it's not. The guy's sexual hormones ran out 20 years ago. The point is, he's not interested. Somebody had to point out to him. Somebody younger than him had to go, look how shocking that is. And to him, it's not shocking or not shocking. It's just of no interest. It's like, a 70-year-old man that somebody tells him that Megadeth has a new CD. He doesn't care one way or the other, so he can be tolerant, as long as he don't have to listen to it. So you have to know the difference, back to where I was. You knew all that, but I had to point out again that it's not that you have simply gotten old when you pass by that book. That's why I said assume that your metaphysical or your metaphorical hormones, your interest in this is still as juicy and active as they ever were, but you suddenly realize the things that I pursued, the things that I was driven to pursue, and the things that even apparently were paying off for me, that I did it for years, you suddenly realize I wouldn't pick it up, I wouldn't even bother to pick it up. It is this process that you will finally realize that there is simply no information anywhere out there that has to do with this, that is what you want. There is only one place you will end up focusing your attention in a non-selfish way. It's got nothing to do with ordinary selfishness or self-centeredness. Because if anybody knew it, you're not doing it right anyway. But it is you become a kind of Muhammad walking around, but instead of going up in the mountains, going off in a cave and disappearing by yourself, or instead of a Jesus going off for 40 days and 40 nights and saying, well, I'm not coming back until I wrestle every demon That is, until I bring my consciousness under control. Or for Buddha to say, well, the rest of you go ahead. I'm sick of it. I'm going to sit here, and I'm either going to die, or I'm going to figure out what the hell this is going on. But I'm not wandering around and listening to anybody or studying anymore. That is when you realize that you can only focus your attention. You can focus what you're looking for on you. That is the only place. And again, I'm not telling you that you immediately are going to look in some way and find a trick. That's what the story is representing. It's not an immediate something, but you realize gradually. Remember this? It just all sort of gradually sneaks up on you that there is absolutely outside of my skin, outside of my consciousness, outside of my mind, there is nothing, absolutely nothing of use to me. And that is not an editorial comment. It is simply, at least I've narrowed it down. It only took me 50 years, but I've narrowed it down. I've been able to cut out everything except according to the size that you conceive of your consciousness as being. I started to say a walnut inside the size of a small cantaloupe. But some of you may have a higher opinion of your consciousness, and you may think of it as a cantaloupe within a cantaloupe. Now that I pointed out whatever size you may feel it to be, my only suggestion is do not fall irreversibly in love with that metaphorical picture. At least you have narrowed the challenge, the problem, the challenge, down to a very specific, local, and may I say, more manageable area. That rather than waiting, rather than the continuing, no matter how vague or no matter how specific it may have been, that I am going to get information from some great institution, from the history of some institution, from the lineage of some group of teachers, from some philosophical school of thought, from some religion. You no longer have to weigh and choose. There's no longer, should I give more emphasis to this? Should I spend more time over here? You might as well find your own cave with Gabriel, your own wilderness of Jesus, your own Buddha's Bodhi tree, my version, or I gave it to you. Take off your clothes, go home and sit in the closet. There you are. There you are. And of course, if you get good at it, you can walk around. Apparently, fairly civil. Not wearing a raincoat with only pants from the knees down. Yeah. But actually dressed and fairly civil. And inside, though, unbeknownst to anyone, you are naked, sitting in the dark in a closet. But you can smile and go, oh, really? How interesting. My. Which adds about as much to the general collective wisdom of man as you could do if you tried specifically to add some great new insights and information to help others. There's a lot to be said for sitting nude in a metaphorical closet in the dark by yourself, I think.